Thank you all for being here today, and welcome to Juneteenth Woburn 2022. My name is Phil Gordon, and I'm the Deputy Director of SCI Social Capital Inc. We're a nonprofit based right here in Woburn, dedicated to strengthening communities through civic engagement and youth development programs. Definitely please check out our community table today and learn a little bit more about what we do, and maybe grab a Juneteenth t-shirt while you're at it. Before we get started, I would like to take a few moments to acknowledge the people and organizations that help bring us all together today. First, I would like to thank the Juneteenth Committee, who did amazing work to plan today's event over the last few months. And in particular, I would like to thank my committee co-chairs for the second year running, Jennifer Jones, Hermaine Gordon, Emily Lipset, and Mike West, who've worked with me since early February before the committee even started meeting. Second, I would like to thank Mayor Scott Galvin and the City of Woburn for their time, support, and resources that were essential to making this event happen today. In particular, I'd like to thank Diane Merles from the Mayor's Office, Gordon Vincent in the City Clerk's Office, Patricia Bergeron George in the Board of Health, Police Chief Rufo, our officer detail today, and last but definitely not least, I'd like to thank the Woburn Department of Public Works, in particular Lenny Burnham, Frank Lombardo, and I think there was a couple Johns in there as well. Can't say enough about how helpful the DPW was throughout this whole process, and I think the City of Woburn is really lucky to have such an amazing department. I'd also like to thank the Woburn City Council, the Licensing Committee, and the School Committee for fully supporting our efforts on multiple fronts. Next, I would like to thank the Library Director, Hermaine Gordon, and her whole staff, who are all amazing and have done so much work to prepare the library for today's event, and are such a valuable resource in our community every day. In particular, I'd like to thank Tracy Breeden for the t-shirt design, the Children's Room staff, and the circulation staff for preparing Juneteenth displays, buttons, activities, and much more. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors and partners today who help make the event a reality through donating time, money, and resources. St. John's Baptist Church of Woburn, Woburn Welcomes, Winchester Hospital, NAACP Mystic Valley Area Branch, the Woburn Democratic City Committee, State Representative Richard Haggerty, State Representative Michelle Chicholo, the Network for Social Justice, and Cadence Studio. And then, just before I wrap up and say a little logistics, looking out in the crowd today, it's really amazing seeing us all come together. I know it hasn't been the easiest time for our community or any community in America, but this is how we move forward. This is really how we build and be stronger, right? And I really wanted to mention all the names that I did for that reason, so everyone really understands that it takes a village really to make something like this happen, and it takes a village to keep moving forward. So I hope that's a takeaway that we all have. All right, finally some event notes and highlights. I know we're a little bit of a late start, so we have a great keynote speaker today, Michael Curry. We're super excited. If you don't have a program brochure, be sure to check one out. I think they're by the waters over here. We have a program with Dr. Bernard Lafayette, civil rights leader. That's actually going to start at 2:30 instead of 2 o'clock with the delay. We have in the program room on the bottom floor of the library, we've got 3 local artists that are amazing. Please check out their art. But we also have a student art exhibit on the main floor in the makerspace from the James and McCown Boys and Girls Club of Woburn club members. Please also check that out and support them. Got children's activities in the children's room. We've got multiple photo booths, one straight in the downstairs lobby, and then we've got a children's photo booth in the children's room as well. Lots of great food vendors and community tables, so please check those out. Like I said, we have t-shirts. After our speaking program, we're gonna have DJ and some music. And then if you need bathrooms, they are in downstairs, past the program room to your left, right? And then if you need any help, anybody in a blue Juneteenth t-shirt is a volunteer. They should be able to help you. If not, just come find me and I will. All right, that's all I have. Now I'm going to invite Mayor Scott Galvin up to give our Juneteenth proclamation.
I want to welcome everybody. And particularly want to thank Phil Gordon and his great committee. Phil put this together. It was quite a Herculean task, as you can see all the different vendors around and the people here. Phil put this together on the go and did a great job. I've never seen anybody get a program together like this in this amount of time. So let's give Phil a great round of applause. Also, before I do the proclamation, it is, as Phil said, it's a great community. It's great to see people get together like this to celebrate such a great cause for Juneteenth. On Monday, I was fortunate enough to join a number of people to raise the flag on the Common, so it's up there flying proudly. So thanks for that honor. And at this point, I'd like to recognize a couple of city councilors. City Council is always very supportive of the community events, and today is no different. City Council President Mike Buchanan's here. Alderman of Ward 7, Charlie Viola. Alderman from Ward 6, Lou DeMambro. Former Chief of the Woburn Police Department, and now Alderman at Large, Bob Ferrulo as well. Thanks. Same with school committee members. They show up to a number of events. Today is no different. We have Andrew Lipset and Colleen Cormier. Thanks to you guys for showing up and supporting causes as well. Thank you. And I know Rich will recognize his aide, Anthony, but Anthony's our state veterans rep, and Anthony's everywhere. So, Anthony, thanks for what you do. Great, you got a great future ahead of you. So, Juneteenth, Independence Day. Whereas nearly 9 decades after our nation's founding and more than 2 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, enslaved Americans in Galveston, Texas, received word that they are free from bondage and were recognized for the first time as citizens. Black Americans came to commemorate Juneteenth with celebrations across the country, building new lives in a new tradition that we honor today. And whereas Juneteenth is a day in which we remember the moral stain and terrible toll of slavery on our country, a long legacy of systematic racism and inequality and inhumanity. But it is a day that also reminds us of our capacity to heal, hope, and emerge from our darkest moments with purpose and resolve. And whereas our country has taken steps to root out and dismantle existing institutionalized racism and deep-seated inequities, and this starts with holding ourselves to the highest possible standards of accountability on our obligations and commitments, acknowledging our continued challenges and dealing with them transparently. And whereas on this day, in hundreds of communities across the country, including Woburn, people of all races, nationalities, and religions join hands to acknowledge the painful history and lasting systematic impact of slavery and racial injustice in the United States. Juneteenth Day is an important opportunity to recommit ourselves to the goal of creating a more equal and just society, and that effort continues today. Now, therefore, I, Scott Galvin, Mayor of the City of Woburn, do hereby proclaim June 19th as Juneteenth Independence Day in the City of Woburn, and I urge all of our citizens in Woburn to take cognizance of this event and participate fittedly in observance like this today. Thank you very much.
I'd like to welcome Michelle Chichro, State Representative, up to the microphone.
Good afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful day and what a great turnout for this fantastic event. I'm State Representative Michelle Socolo, and I'm so pleased to be with you all today. I want to just make a few comments and share some thoughts and a little bit of a history lesson, if you can bear with me, because I think it's interesting and important in helping us understand who we're all about and where we need to go. So Juneteenth is the day that commemorates the end of slavery in the Confederate States. It is the day, June 19th, when the Union Army established authority over Texas and so freed the slaves that were living there. Texas was the last state to free enslaved people. When I consider that date, I can't help but reflect on our own history here in Massachusetts, where we followed a decidedly different path. And while our Commonwealth has certainly not always acted in ways beyond reproach, we did get a few things right when it comes to slavery. Few people know that the first version of the Massachusetts Constitution was rejected by the voters in 1788 because it contained a clause recognizing slavery as a legal institution and prohibiting slaves from voting. After that version was rejected, the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 was adopted by the voters statewide, and it contained important precedent-setting language. Echoing the Declaration of Independence, that clause in our Massachusetts Constitution reads, "All men are born free and equal and have the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties." And while some might lament that our forefathers didn't include women in that clause, for its time, those thoughts and views were visionary and inspirational. So you see, we got a few things right in Massachusetts, and yet, since our Constitution was silent on slavery, the institution carried on in the Commonwealth after 1780, as those slave owners continued the abhorrent practice with business as usual, retaining their slaves. And our state was complicit in its unwillingness to challenge the status quo. However, I am again impressed by the people of Massachusetts when several things then happened. A committee of 11 residents got together in Sheffield, Mass, in Judge John Ashley's home to develop a position statement known as the Sheffield Declaration, and that espoused a position that mankind in a state of nature are free and equal and independent of one another, and it called on their representatives in the general court to advance those ideals. Mom Bet, a black female slave living in Judge Ashley's home, was inspired by these teachings and took the courageous act of suing for her freedom. In a lower court proceeding, she obtained a writ in 1780 requiring her release, which her master then appealed to the Supreme Court. Fortunately, he later dropped his appeal around the same time because I think he recognized he was on the wrong side of history. But at that same time, another series of cases known as the Quack Walker cases were proceeding. Quack Walker was an African-American slave who had been beaten by his second master, and he sued for his freedom in a series of three complicated cases. But ultimately, the Supreme Court Judge, William Cushing, on July 8th in 1783, in his historic opinion, he reversed slavery by citing that slavery was incompatible with the new Massachusetts Constitution. And then we see in 1790 in the census there were no recorded slaves in Massachusetts. So here we have a case where Massachusetts was ahead of its time, working to make sure that all people were free and equal. And while we still have a ways to go to improve the conditions and ensure true equity and justice for all of our residents, it inspires me to think that we knew what was right back then and we know what is right today. And together, working through events like this and being inclusive and working to change the institutions of our government, we can make a much better society. And so I'm thrilled to be with you here all today, and I hope you enjoy the celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Next, I'd like to invite State Senator Cindy Freeman to the microphone.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the second annual Juneteenth celebration in Woburn. To no one's surprise, Social Capital, the Woburn Public Library, and the City of Woburn have put together an incredible event. And we need a big shout out to them for all of them and all of the sponsors for today. So let's give them and Phil applause. So I won't lie to you. Like many people nationwide, I was not fully aware of Juneteenth and what it represented until a few years ago, when it was finally acknowledged as a holiday and I learned its importance. I knew the history of the Emancipation Proclamation, proclamation, but I had no idea that it took 2.5 years to carry it out. And even then, marshals had to go to Texas and basically declare that they had to emancipate the slaves. Similarly, in Massachusetts, we made history as one of the first states to emancipate slaves, as Michelle said. And there's a story, the story little known of Quock Walker. I'd never heard of Quock Walker until a constituent from Lexington told me about it, and the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court declaring slavery unconstitutional in Massachusetts as a result. So it is long overdue that we acknowledge these events as fundamental part of our history. And it begs the question, what else have we left out from the telling of our country's story that we need in order to build a better future? Juneteenth is a day for us to remember the struggles and the achievements of Black Americans in the forming of our nation. And we must also use this time as a reminder that we have much more to do because of that history. Economic inequality, healthcare disparities, unequal access to housing, and quality education are all products of our nation's history. And understanding how we got here is a critical step in righting wrongs and moving our Commonwealth and nation to a more equitable society for all, and a critical step in ensuring that those long left behind have an equal chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, regardless of the color of their skin. So thank you all for allowing me to speak and to celebrate Juneteenth here in Woburn, and thank you so much for all coming and for acknowledging this important event. This is a wonderful community.
Thank you, Cindy. Great words. And next, I would like to welcome State Representative Richard Haggerty.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for being here today. What a great, amazing turnout, amazing weather. We're so fortunate to live in such an amazing city where everybody gets out to support one another. I'm so pleased to join so many in celebrating Juneteenth and celebrating each other. We stand together today both to celebrate, to remember, and also to recommit ourselves to the mission that is equality. We know we have more work to do. We know we still have to beat back the forces of hatred and bigotry. We know the journey of how America came to celebrate Juneteenth has been difficult and ugly. But still we come to celebrate and remember. We celebrate the work of all those who struggled for equality. We celebrate the end of slavery. We celebrate each other for supporting one another today and every day. But still we remember. We remember Jim Crow. We remember Charlottesville. We remember Buffalo. So I join you today as we recommit ourselves to continuing on the path toward a more perfect union. We must recommit ourselves as a city, as a commonwealth, as a nation to justice, equality, and dare I say kindness. And we must remind ourselves that even today, we need our public policy to reflect these goals. We need our schools to reflect these goals, and we need our neighborhoods to reflect these goals. Lincoln called on all of us in the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves. He said, "And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind in the gracious favor of Almighty God." So again, I ask all of us today to celebrate, to remember, and to recommit ourselves to one another. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rich. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. I'd like to welcome Michael Curry, Esquire, up to the stage. Michael is the CEO of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers, as well as being on the National NAACP Board of Directors for a number of years. Michael.
So as I've said to folks as I walked in, it's an honor and a privilege to be with you today. There's a few places I want to share, or three things I want to share with you. One, I just want to take pause for a second and recognize the times that we're in. We sometimes, in the midst of raising our families and doing all the things that we need to do to put food in our homes and get our kids off to school, we sort of lose sight of the last 2 years of COVID-19. And as your Senator Friedman, who's been on the front lines of this fight, knows, this pandemic's taken a toll on all of us, whether you realize it or not. As we sit here, stand here right now, over 534 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide with 6.3 million deaths. 12 billion vaccine doses have been administered. I need that number to sit with you for a second. 6.3 billion lives. Over 85 million cases in the US with well over 1 million deaths. Close to 260 million with at least one dose. 82.9% of those 5+ with at least one vaccine. Close to 1.75 million cases in Massachusetts and close to 20,000 deaths just here in the Commonwealth. 5 million fully vaccinated with the primary series, 1 million additional with at least one dose. I need us, as we talk about Juneteenth, as we go about our day, about our week, not to lose sight that we've lost lives. And I want to just acknowledge, because I've been on the front lines of this work of trying to respond to this pandemic on behalf of 52 community health centers across the state, over 1 million patients, 300 practice sites, that I've had the blessing of working on the front lines with some folks that are right here with you today. And chief among them, top among them, is your Senator Cindy Friedman. Give her a round of applause, please. We should have known a pandemic was coming. Over 100 years ago, there was a pandemic, a Spanish flu, and we learned lessons during that pandemic. We learned that the politics played in the public health 100 years ago. People challenged the notion of why they needed to wear a mask 100 years ago. People questioned whether there was actually a pandemic, as it took millions of lives across the globe. Hence why it's called the Spanish flu. Countries in the middle of the war were denying that a disease was even spreading the world. So I want to think about Cindy, Senator Friedman, and many others who've been on the front lines of this, but also fighting for equity as we talk about Juneteenth. Because what we found out during the pandemic was that oftentimes these disasters, these circumstances, the shifts in the economy impact us all differently. And it took way too many black and brown lives. Way too many black and brown families all across this nation were infected at higher rates, hospitalized at higher rates, and died at higher rates. They couldn't shelter in place because they were essential workers. They didn't have the resources to stock up on food. They didn't have the technology necessarily to Zoom into a medical appointment or to school or to work. So I don't want us to lose sight as we celebrate this holiday that this last 2+ years has taken a toll on all of us, and some more than others. So I have the blessing of being a civil rights advocate and a health leader in the community health center space. And as we talk about Juneteenth, I want to share a quote from Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Negro History Week, now we know as Black History Month. He said, "History was not the mere gathering of facts. The object of historical study was to arrive at a reasonable interpretation of those facts." We don't come together today just to study history. That's not what this is about, by the way. For those slaves that were liberated in 1865, they wouldn't want you to just come together and just celebrate without reflecting, without understanding the taint of race in American history. I often say, as a quote that people know me for, I say it takes time for truth to catch up to history. Juneteenth, the holiday celebrated annually on the 19th of June to commemorate the Union Army General Gordon Granger announcing federal orders in the city of Galveston, Texas. as was said by the mayor and many others, 2.5 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, became official on January 1st, 1863. I do a presentation all over the country called Quantum Leap. If anybody probably here over their 40s, they will remember there was a TV show in the late 80s, early 90s called Quantum Leap. The main character, Sam Beckett, would jump through time and he would jump into the body of a person and he'd have to solve whatever the predicament, the dilemma they were dealing with in that moment. I thought the film, the TV show was masterful. I remember an episode in the late 1980s where Sam Beckett jumped into time and he jumped into the body of a Ku Klux Klan member who was about to commit that crime, that murder at that period in history. And he tried to solve that murder. And here's why that episode mattered to me, because I would often ask myself, as a young kid who grew up in the projects, in a housing project in Roxbury, Massachusetts, if I could jump through time, where would I go? And I said to myself, I would go to 1619 with the arrival of those 20 or so odd slaves in Virginia. And some of my classmates in college would look at me like I was crazy. Why would I want to go back to 1619 and the arrival of slaves in Virginia? I would go back to the Nat Turner Revolt so I could understand when people, like we celebrate patriots, why people would violently protest to liberate themselves. Give me liberty or give me death. That's our American history. But I didn't know who Nat Turner was. I didn't know about black people who sought to liberate themselves like we learn of other liberators in American history. That didn't come to us in our classrooms. We didn't learn that in the short sections of our history books. I would go back to 1915 with D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. That film that I don't know if every one of you have seen, but I'm going to encourage you to watch the film. It will disgust you, but you got to watch it, because that's American history. That's how we thought of a nation of black and brown folks, like that film depicts in 1915. First film shown in the White House under Woodrow Wilson. A battle in downtown Boston where 10,000 black folks marched on downtown Boston to shut down that film because they knew the implications of that film being shown across America would lead to racial hatred and violence across this nation. In fact, in 1919, there's a period of time called Red Summer. So I know my good friend Zane in Boston, in the Mystic Valley NAACP this year, they know the NAACP history of a race riot in Springfield, Illinois in 1909, where 2 black men were accused of crimes, and the townspeople in the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln, by the way, the great emancipator, they marched on that downtown to lynch those 2 black men. And I'm so thankful in our history for people like Cindy Friedman, like James Reed, like Mary White Ovington, like William English Walling, and so many others that have a compass. I'm not talking about your gut, because your gut will get you to do a lot of things that are wrong. I'm talking about your compass, from reading the souls of black folks, or the new Jim Crow, or the color of law, or caste, or warmth of other suns. You adjust your compass and you make different decisions. I'm proud of those leaders who stood up to injustice like they did. But 1909, 2 white people in that town took those 2 black men some 40 or so miles out of town and saved their lives. But you don't know this history of Springfield, Illinois. It led to days of a race riot. They burned black businesses and murdered black families, and you probably have heard of Black Wall Street sometime later, but maybe you never heard of Red Summer in 1919, where these sort of violent acts happen all across this country. So as I stand here today and we talk about it, I want to ask you to do me a favor. I want you to quantum leap with me for a second. That means I want you to leave this little parking lot, and I want you to be somewhere else as I have you think about what it was like to stand in Galveston when General Granger came in to announce to those slaves who had for generations been in bondage. Now I know that may not sit with some of you, so I want to say it again. Generations in bondage. 3/5 of a human being, 1788, in our Constitution. So we talk about just a few days, we're going to celebrate 1776. We're going to set off fireworks for 4th of July, but I need you to know in 1788, we were just 3/5 of a human being. So I want you to be in Galveston as I read to you what he read to those slaves who were actually no longer slaves, but had found out that they were free. The people are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves the absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them become that between employer and hired labor. The free are advised to remain in their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and they will not be supported in idleness either. I want you to know what he read to those slaves, now freedmen, in 1865. As you quantum leap, I want you to think about what it means to be a slave in 1865, finding out you're free and you've been ripped apart from your children, that your marriages have been broken up, that you have family members that you want to search out. So I need you to know that when the general said to them, I need you to stay in place, by the way, because that was their workforce. They were the essential workers in 1865. You couldn't have a mass evacuation of black folks out of the South, so they had to keep you in place. I need you to understand that history too, as we celebrate Juneteenth. I need you to know that 250,000 folks evacuated Texas, despite that order. So I know that they didn't celebrate like they could have in 1865. That would not have been what the Union Army wanted them to do. They wouldn't want them dancing in the streets. They wouldn't want them celebrating their liberation, because that would have been a slight to the Confederate Army. That would have possibly led to tensions and violence with the Confederate soldiers. I need you to know what it was like yourselves as you quantum leap to be in Galveston in 1865, because that's your real connection. Coming out and the food and the festivities, but that's not what this is all about. So when I think about myself as a little kid who grew up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and I often tell people in my Quantum Leap presentation, I was a little kid, and when I walked out of my home, most of the folks who looked like me were dying of diabetes and heart disease and cancer at a higher rate. They lived less of a life than many people in this country. Cindy Friedman knows that. Their life expectancy was 10 to 15 years shorter. When I walked out of my house, I knew that most of the black men who I saw growing up were mass incarcerated by the time I was a teenager. I knew that when I walked out of the house, I wasn't received the same way in Faneuil Hall and Copley Place and Cleveland Circle. They thought I was a thief. I knew when I walked out of my house and I visited family in Alabama, in North Minneapolis, and East St. Louis, in Atlanta, in Georgia, across the state, they were living the exact same way. I need you to take that in for a second. Didn't have wealth, didn't own a home, was dying at higher rates of almost every disease before COVID-19, were mass incarcerated for mostly non-violent drug offenses, were living in poverty. If we don't get the message of Juneteenth, which is really about how do we untether ourselves from inequity, because it never made sense that a race of people, that black and brown folks live in the conditions they did in 1865 or 2022. So I have to ask a question, and I appreciate that. I wanna share a concept with you as I sort of wind it down. When I was doing health equity one time, I was at a presentation, and Healthcare for All, Senator Friedman was doing a presentation, and they said, we want to introduce you to this notion, this concept called the weathering effect. And they said, Michael, well, the weathering effect, We're gonna use this example. We went in and asked black parents to rate their kids' asthma from 1 to 10. I had asthma. My sister had asthma. My mother had asthma. And those black parents rated the kids' asthma 3, 4s, and 5s. Then they had the doctors go in and evaluate those same kids' asthma, and they were 8, 9s, and 10s. And they said, Michael, you can get so weathered to being sick. It becomes so normalized to being sick that you taking the Flovent and the Alupent every 3, 4 times a day becomes normal. You sitting out of gym, not going to work becomes normal. You being in the emergency room of the hospital with asthma becomes normal. So I asked you the question, what are you weathered to? As you turn on your television and you see 250 mass shootings since January, I want to state that again. 250 mass shootings since January. What are you weathered to? As we turn on our televisions 2 years after George Floyd's murder in that 9 minutes and 29 seconds, and I ask you, what are you weathered to, as we can rattle off names that we saw on television that played out in front of us, but there are so many names that you've never seen or never heard, and so many videos that don't exist. So I love that we are celebrating history and we're peeling the onion of history in a way that truth is catching up to history. But shame on us if we do this without a responsibility to change our future. We have an obligation to take the history of Juneteenth, and in the spirit of those 4 million slaves worth $3.6 billion in value, understand that they would have wanted us to carry that torch forward and wipe out the taint of race in all of our institutions, in all of our systems. So I am so pleased with SCI, with Social Capital, with the city of Woburn, with the library coming together to create this space for you to reflect, to celebrate. But we got work to do. It doesn't end here. And what I love, and I just left, got off a plane at 3 o'clock this morning, whipped over through another Juneteenth festival that I had to stop by, and a good friend of mine, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, I have a quote that I love. She says, "Those closest to the pain should be closest to the power." Those closest to the pain should be closest to the power. So I want you to think about this in everything you do. I don't care if you're a teacher, a doctor, an epidemiologist, an elected official. Whenever you enter a room and there's no woman in that room, when there's no person of color in that room, when there's nobody who represents an LGBTQI community in that room, I need you to ask yourself, why not? Because talent never just existed in white men. Talent exists in all of us. I'm going to tell you very quickly as I shut down. During the pandemic, I was in a restaurant, and a good friend tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, "Mike, I want to introduce you to somebody who's new to Boston." And Senator, I turned around, and it was Kizzmekia Corbett. Kizzmekia Corbett is Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. She's a young African-American woman who was on the team that found the Moderna vaccine. So I said, before she could even say anything, I was like a groupie who just met Michael Jordan. I said, wait a minute. I talk about you all the time. I said, because right now everybody's talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, but I use you as the example. I said, because right now there's a little black girl sitting in Roxbury, on a city street in Woburn, or in St. Louis, or Chicago, or LA, who's meant to find a cure for cancer, but will never know her, because she doesn't have academic rigor in her school, because it's a failing school, because her parents and aunts and uncles are gone too soon, dying of disease, because she lives in communities impacted by violence and trauma. I need you to think about this from now on. So we talk about this inclusion thing. It's an imperative for all of us. So I want to say Juneteenth is special, but I'm a professor, so I teach at Suffolk University. I teach at New England Law, Boston. I give out homework. I give out homework when I talk anywhere. So I need you to read The Color of Law. I need you to read Isabel's book, Warmth of Other Suns, and Cast. So the next time we have this gathering, you come to this celebration with a heightened level of consciousness about American history, because it should have never taken this long for truth to catch up to history. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Very important words I think we all need to hear and take to heart, and I think we all have some work to do, right? Everybody has got a little work to do. All right, I would like to invite Christy Delanois up to lead us in the singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing, also known as the Black National Anthem. If you turn to the back of your program brochure, we have a couple verses for you to follow on.
Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has brought us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun and our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast by Thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met Thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee. Shadowed beneath Thy hand, may we forever stand. May we find true to our native land.
Yeah, big improvement on last year, huh? All right. Thank you all for being here for the speaking program. That concludes that portion of the event. There's still a lot to go on. We're going to have a few student performances coming up right after this. Right here, we've got Jada Stewart and Michaela Hamilton singing a couple songs, and then we got the Woburn Memorial High School step team. Stick around for that. Inside, in a few minutes, we're going to be starting Dr. Lafayette's program in the Richardson Gallery. Then following that, we've got some speeches and spoken word by the Woburn Memorial High School Embrace Club. Children's room is open now, so check that out. And be sure to check out our vendors. We got Berkshire Brewing Company over here. They got two brand new beers just came out, so definitely check them out while they're around. We've got Shabby Eats in the back, Zach's Ice Cream, RJ Torino on the grill, and Picnic's International Kitchen. And then we've also got Massage Inc. Elite, so if you need a massage, check that out. And Nirvana Creations and Santander Bank. All right, thank you all. Have fun.
Thank you all for coming today for our conversation with Dr. Bernard Lafayette. My name is Andrew Lipset. I'm a member of the Woburn School Committee and high school history teacher. And I will be moderating today. Dr. Bernard Lafayette learned the principles of nonviolent resistance as a student in Nashville, Tennessee, with others who would go on to play major roles in the civil rights movement, such as Diane Nash, James Bevel, John Lewis. Dr. Lafayette helped begin a sit-in movement that integrated the city of Nashville in 1960. Before becoming a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC, or SNCC. With SNCC, Dr. Lafayette took part in the Freedom Rides, during which he was part of a group that was attacked by the KKK in Montgomery, Alabama, and jailed in Jackson, Mississippi. In 1962, Dr. Lafayette became the director of SNCC's Alabama Voter Registration Project. His work there, alongside local activists, helped set the stage for the critical Selma marches of 1965 and the Voting Rights Act, which was passed as a result. Dr. Lafayette subsequently worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to attempt to desegregate housing in Chicago, Illinois in 1966, and to coordinate the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, which he continued after King's assassination in April of that year. Dr. Lafayette received his master's in education from Harvard University in 1972 and a doctorate in 1974, and served as a scholar in residence at the King Center in Atlanta. In 1993, he was named president of his alma mater, American Baptist Theological Seminary, and served as the director of the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies at the University of Rhode Island. Most recently, in March of 2022, the city of Selma, Alabama, renamed the section of Union Street where Dr. Lafayette had lived and worked after him, to recognize his influence and contribution to peace, equality, and justice in the United States and beyond. I'd like to ask you all now, please, to help me welcome Dr. Bernard Lafayette to Woburn. Dr. Lafayette.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the program we have there. And I am very proud of you and those of you who have provided leadership for this program. I think the most important thing that we must continue to do is to expose our young people to the important points in history. And so, because if you don't know your history, your future will be a mystery. So it's absolutely important. And research is the key to being able to understand the resources that you have to make decisions that will affect your future. And that's all we do, basically, is to understand the past so we can attempt to have some understanding of the future. I am certainly aware that you have focused on the Juneteenth quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is just focus on a couple movements. But mainly I want to talk about leadership and how you go about making decisions that will make the difference. Because things will happen automatically, but if you don't have an understanding of what has happened in the past, and particularly how it happened, then you are sort of in a position where the future might come as it may, and we have no influence or change that we can offer to make a better future or a different future. So, I first want to say that from native Tampa, Florida, grew up there and learned a lot while I was a little boy growing up there. There's another documentary that's out that Claiborne and Carson participated in putting together, and it's the Harlem International Film Festival. You can look it up, and it's about a half hour long. And the film won the International Award, and it's about me and my growing up and making decisions as a little boy. And so I wanted to make sure you got a chance to know about that. The street was named after me in Selma, Alabama, street where I lived, and when I was in Selma, Alabama. And it's also the street where they attempted to kill me when they killed Medgar Evers. And I was told by the FBI that it was a 3-state conspiracy, and they planned to kill 3 of us the same night in 3 different states. They planned to kill Ben Elton Cox in Louisiana, and that's where they plotted. And they were going to plan to kill Medgar Evers, who was the head of the NAACP in the state of Mississippi, and they planned to kill me. So we'll get into whatever aspect you want to get into and you're interested in. But what I'll do is make a quick run through of all the different places I've worked, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. A lot of it's been covered there with the Selma movement, the Freedom Rides, and the Chicago movement. And after I met with Martin Luther King in Memphis, Tennessee, April 4th, he had appointed me as the National Program Administrator and head of the Poor People's Campaign. He was scheduled to go to Washington, D.C. after he did the Memphis March to support the sanitation workers. And it broke out in violence there. And he wanted to not leave that as his legacy, but to do the march over again. So he asked me to go and do the press conference for him, which was scheduled in Washington, D.C. But the morning of the 4th of April, I was with him in room 306 at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis. And I was going over the press statement, and I stayed there at the hotel that night before. Martin Luther King and the others went and spoke. I stayed there to work on the press statement. So that morning, I was reviewing that with Martin Luther King, and he had confidence that I would do the press statement for him. And he appointed me to supervise his staff, program directors, like Hosea Williams and Jim Bevel and Jesse Jackson, Dorothy Cotton, and just down the line. And most of them were older than I was, but he nevertheless assigned me to supervise them. Well, that was quite a task, and I decided that I would prepare myself for that. So once we met at the hotel, and Martin Luther King approved the press statement, as I was DC and get things started, and I'll be along later. Okay. And then before I could go out of the door, he said, now, Lafayette, the next movement we're going to have is to internationalize and institutionalize nonviolence. Okay, this is the next movement, time to get ready for that. So, while my plane was in flight to Washington, D.C., that's when Martin Luther King was shot. And I arrived at the airport in D.C., and no one was there to pick me up. So when I called back to the office, they told me he'd been shot. I got on the phone at the airport. They used to have, phones in a circle, and you would talk on two telephones at the same time, one in each ear. So I called the media because I wanted to know the status of Martin Luther King. UPI and AP, Associated Press and United Press International. Well, they were giving me what they call the reading of the ticker tape. The ticker tape was something that they would send electronically to the media. So they were reading that to me, what they received from Memphis. The UPI reporter, who was white, broke down and I could hear him sniffling and tears, I imagine, coming out of his eyes. And he stopped reading. And I had a suspicion right then that Martin Luther King had been shot. But he wasn't dead, he was shot. The AP reporter told me, and kept reading, that Martin Luther King had been shot. So, frankly speaking, I certainly was disturbed by this, greatly disturbed, but I didn't think he was going to die. Because after all, Martin Luther King had been stabbed in his chest with a letter opener up in New York when he was signing books. And he survived. And I'll tell details because otherwise you wouldn't get him. Martin Luther King had a perfect cross over his heart where he had been stabbed and then had surgery. And the letter opener was very close to his elbow, and the doctor said that, who did the surgery, said that had Martin Luther King sneezed, they would have punctured his, would have led to death. I remember hearing about the little girl who wrote a letter to Martin Luther King on a card, and at the end of the card, she said, and I'm glad you didn't sneeze. Okay, Martin Luther King treasured that very much. Well, we were waiting to hear what was going to happen next, and when I had a call from the office, they told me to go there. And when I arrived at, I think it was 14th and U Street in Washington, D.C., there were riots in the street because they heard that Martin Luther King had been shot. And people were just going wild. I'll tell you how wild it was. One man was running down the street calling for somebody to get their fire truck because the building where his grandmother lived was on fire. But he's the one that threw the Molotov cocktail and it broke in the window of the store that was on the bottom. He was so wild until he's the one that set the place on fire. And now he was calling for the fire department. And Walter Von Troyen was out in the streets trying to quell and Stokely Carmichael. They both were out there at 14th and U trying to see if they could quell the riot, because people were going absolutely berserk. Well, I realized it was a heavy burden on me now to fulfill Martin Luther King's last request. One was the Poor People's Campaign, and I had to do the funeral with the staff there. And then we had to, as I say, do the Poor People's Campaign. And then I personally had to think about doing the institutionalizing nonviolence and internationalizing nonviolence, which was a real challenge. So I had to figure out what I needed to do to get ready for that. So I decided to focus my life work in the movement on building leadership. Not to be the leader or become the leader, but to build leadership. So if something happens to me, there'll be others who are trained to be able to continue to establish institutions. And that's what Martin Luther King wanted. So I had to go back to school, and I went to Selma, Alabama. Of course, I did that earlier, and I had that kind of experience. And so I decided that that would be the order of my life, and that is helping to build leadership. And I always admired doing that. What kind of contribution could I make? And that was to help make sure that the movement continued. And that's the way you make it continue. So there was Selma, Alabama, and then there was the movement in Chicago, and you got other movements that we had in setting up institutions, like in the University of Rhode Island, and helping with Martin Luther King's organization itself. I stayed on the board and played a role. In fact, I'm still chairman of the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and that's mainly to make sure it survived and sustained itself and continue to do the work of Martin Luther King. In addition to that, I've done work abroad, Haiti, and I've even trained Cuban in jail in Cuba. Yeah, inmates in Cuba. And I always smile when I think about it, because the guards stayed up watching us all night, but they were taking the training also. They wanted to learn about this nonviolence. So they stayed up all night, not just watching us. They started, after it was over, they started asking questions. So they really wanted to know what it was all about. And there's a Martin Luther King program there in Cuba. Yeah. I went down and I met Castro, yeah, when I was there. And he was very interested in what Martin Luther King tried to accomplish. So anyway, Cuba, and there's Colombia, down in Latin America. And we had a march there, and the other thing, I got kidnapped by the FARC down there. So I'm just telling you all these things so you can, if you want to ask questions about them later, you can. So then we went to Nigeria. Nigeria, we trained over 40,000 Nigerians who were fighting with the government because of the oil spill that Shell had in Nigeria. And so we had to help them stop fighting the government over the oil spill and try to work together. And down in, South Africa, yeah, in South Africa, we did work there to help Nelson Mandela become president of the country. Because when Mandela started running for presidency and he got the right to vote, the tribes started shooting each other while they were standing in line trying to get registered to vote. These tribes were coming up with rifles and things, shooting and killing each other. And then, first time they were trying to register to vote, they got shot and killed in whatever line by their own fellow countrymen. Well, Mrs. King, Coretta Scott King, was Martin Luther King's wife, and she's the one that called on me to go to South Africa and to quell the shooting and killing. So I did. Well, in addition to that, I've gone around different, like the University of Rhode Island, and also the universities like in Auburn University, and I worked in various other places, establishing institutions, and I've done a lot of work training people who were imprisoned. And one of the things I did up in New York was to train those who were lifers. I trained them to be trainers because I wanted a tenured faculty. So if they had a life sentence, I was able to get them to be trainers. And they went down and trained the youth in the youth facility in Goshen, New York, because they had much more influence over these other teenagers who were in jail than anybody else, because they were, older and life sentence, that kind of thing, understood what they were experiencing. So, there are many other places I've gone. I've gone to Vietnam and helped to do things there as part of the research and that kind of thing, etc. So I'll stop there, and if there's any specific thing you want me to focus on, I'd be glad to respond to those questions. Yes.
Thank you very, very much for that. And we will, for folks in the audience today, we do have a microphone set up right up back, and if people have questions, I would invite you to go back to the microphone and ask. I wanted to start with one of my own, because you're talking about building leadership and how the hard work that goes into that. You yourself got your start in the civil rights movement as a student in Nashville. And when you started, you studied with James Lawson, is that correct? Studying nonviolent protest and nonviolent resistance, with really kind of an amazing collection of people, from James Bevel to Dr. Nash to John Lewis, all sort of in Nashville at that time. And I'm wondering, you were all teenagers when you started this, and I think Nashville doesn't get enough credit for what you were all able to accomplish. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it was like as young people. We have some young people in the audience today to do that kind of work, to build that kind of leadership, and to sort of experience the successes that you experienced at a very young age.
Yes, I appreciate you asking me that question because, frankly, I wanted the opportunity to share Nashville. Well, first of all, when I went to Nashville, I went a week early, so I got a chance to be on the campus and learn something about it, that kind of thing, even before the college opened. And I chose my own room. How's that? Okay? Because I was there first. Well, anyway, I got jobs on campus. I used to be the janitor of the second floor. And so John Lewis was my roommate. And he was going to these workshops offered by James Lawson, Jr. Martin Luther King had asked James Lawson to come south because James Lawson had a lot of experience in nonviolence. Like he'd gone to India and places like that. And he was well versed in Mahatma Gandhi's and Thoreau and other people like that. So John Lewis was going to these workshops, and he tried to get me to go. I said, man, I don't have time for any workshops. Work? I got enough work to do already. Okay? I was a janitor on the second floor. I was the assistant librarian as a freshman. Assistant librarian. Because I had experience in high school in the library and stuff like that. And we used to volunteer to work in the washing dishes. Yes, washing pots in the cafeteria, places like that. So I was very busy. And this is something that's not well known. In addition to that work I was doing on campus, I used to go at noon sometimes and wash pots downtown at one of the restaurants. And in those days we were talking about here, the restaurants were segregated in terms of serving customers. So I used to have to go through the back door, kitchen. And one of the things we did was important, and that was that when we went down to sit in the first time, we did not go to protest. It was not a protest, because we went and sat in. This was a test, and the test was to see what would happen if we did go and sit in the white, lunchrooms. And they just act up. The police threatened to arrest us. We said, okay, and we left. So rather than be arrested. Then we went back to the church where we had our workshops. And what we did was role play. We tested the situation first, and then we went back and rehearsed it. And the purpose of rehearsing it was to know what to expect when these things happen to you. And then you must prepare yourself in terms of how you're going to respond. So you have that opportunity by doing the research first. So, we had teams and we trained leaders. Those are the people who were trained. We had lots of students who participated in the sit-ins, but we trained our leaders. So you had to be part of a group, and your leader is the one that determined whether you should stay and be arrested or whether you should leave. And so they were ready for that. We had a spokesperson, and that was Diane Nash. And one of the reasons why we chose her was because she was an English major at Fisk University. Yes. She would embarrass us by, spitting some verbs or whatever. Okay. And be quoted in the newspaper or, whatever. So, people had different roles. In fact, we were so particular until we had particular students who were assigned to telephone booths downtown. And they were assigned to those telephone booths so that if anyone got injured and needed to go to the hospital, emergency or whatever, that person would call the ambulance. Now, we couldn't depend on the city, to protesters to the emergency, so we had to call the funeral homes. Yeah, the black-owned funeral home had, ambulances. And that's what we would call, and that's why the person stayed next to the phone booth. We were very particular about everything. Like, for example, we could call a mass meeting within an hour because we had a woman who she was an invalid, she could not leave her house by herself without a wheelchair and that sort of thing. So she didn't even go to the mass meetings most of the time, unless she had somebody to carry her. We would make one phone call to her, and then she would have set up what they call a telephone tree. In other words, she would receive the call, and she had 10 other people she would call, and then those 10 people would call 10 other people. And so therefore, one call created, okay? And then she would be on the radio. And when they had a break on the radio on these talk shows, she would announce that there would be a mass meeting, okay, at 6 o'clock at First Baptist Church. So we just made one phone call as students. So we didn't take on all the tasks. We organized different, jobs for people to do that would contribute to the goal we were trying to reach. Okay? Now, the other thing in terms of leadership, must always keep your goal in mind and never veer from it. So your action must reflect the goal you're trying to reach. We decided we were going to do lunch counters downtown, not restaurants. They were eating places, but lunch counters. So we went down and we had sit-ins at lunch counters. And we decided that we would leave room at the lunch counters for anybody else who wanted to come. So we didn't want to block up the lunch counters and that kind of thing. We wanted to share lunch with others. So we weren't trying to keep anybody else in it. Well, long story short, the mayor of Ben West had what we call a committee that was set up, the mayor's committee, to try to solve the problem. So he put together a committee and there were city councilmen, some were black, and other people, commissioners and stuff like that, county folk. And he came up with a solution, he thought, for the problem. And you know what his solution was? That equality was important. So he said that, and he had us come to his office one by one, not as a group, one by one. So we weren't able to debate, we just had to hear the problem. So you know what he came up with? He said the first 10 seats would be for whites on the lunch counter. The middle 10 seats would be integrated. Anybody who wants to sit in those counters, black or white, could sit there. And then the last 10 seats would be black only. So blacks who weren't comfortable and afraid they couldn't digest their food sitting next to a white person. They could sit there. So for each his own. And that's what he proposed to us. And we went back and had a meeting. And guess what we said? No, we wanted, what were we after? And these were all elected officials, and one was a college president. They came up with this solution. Well, I got a chance for black, and then the strategy was that when people keep seeing those black people sitting on the counter eating, they get used to it. And the seats that came together, there were 10 seats right there for whites, and then there are 10 seats for black. The black and white would be sitting next to each other. And when people got used to black and white sitting next to each other, then people start just thinking about eating rather than where they're going to sit. That would be what you call ideal, okay? But it did not serve the principle. And we as students came back and said, no, that does not fulfill what we want. We want people to be able to sit at the lunch counter and focus on eating rather than which seat they're going to sit in. And so we rejected that. And they bombed the lawyer's home. See, Alexander Liberty bombed his home. We wanted to make sure we didn't have a riot, so we organized a march. And we marched all the way downtown. It was a silent march. That's how you keep control. A silent march. And my job was to make sure the marshals were in the right places so they could keep everybody together. But we did not provoke any violence, and we were able to solve that. And by the way, when we finished the lunch counters, the Greyhound bus station had lunch counters, and guess what? We desegregated the Greyhound bus station, all of it, the whole bus station. Then we desegregated the train station, all of it, okay? So our point is, take one step at a time. That's the other strategy. Don't try to do all of it at the same time. And when we finished that same year of 1960, guess what? We desegregated the movie theaters downtown. The movie theaters, yes. Blacks used to have to sit upstairs in the balcony. Whites downstairs. Whites could not sit upstairs in the balcony. So that's the thing you got to realize. The segregation restrict white people from having their freedom. Like the bus. Like white folks cannot sit on that long back seat in the bus. Okay? And if the bus had a wreck, usually it's the front of the bus. Because we had a motor to protect us as black folks. Okay? Well, the point is, and this is the point I'm making, take all things in consideration and see how they play as a part, rather than being what we call a xenophite, be a cosmopolite.
Great list of leadership for all of us. Thank you. I want to open the floor to anyone who has a question. You can make your way to the microphone back there. We also gathered some questions from high school students in Woburn, and as people making the choice to go back to the microphone. We asked you a couple of what our students put together. And one of the first that catches my eye is that, were you ever afraid, and how did you handle that fear? I imagine the answer to the first part is yes.
When I was a little boy, I used to have my own room. I had a brother, but he died at 4 months old, and I was just 4 years old. So for the first part of my childhood, I just lived in a room by myself. And I used to be afraid of ghosts. So I don't know where I got the idea, but I was told that ghosts sleep under your bed at night. So I was afraid of ghosts, and I couldn't sleep a lot. Because every time I hear something, I think it's that ghost somewhere. And they told me all that silly stuff. You talk about some excuse me, I go to church 3 times a week. And there's a Holy Ghost, so there must be an unholy Ghost. So, don't tell me about no such thing as a ghost. But then I didn't like it, the fact that I was afraid. So I decided I was going to fight fear. That's what my fight was. I was going to fight fear. And what you have to do is brace back and decide how you're going to confront ghosts. That'd be one way to fight fear. So I decided the best thing to do, if you were serious about fighting fear of ghosts, walk through the graveyard at night. That's what I did. I started walking to the graveyard at night. I used to ride on a bicycle, but I decided to walk. So I wouldn't have an advantage of trying to escape the ghosts. And I was doing pretty good walking to the graveyard. Shoulders back, everything, heels high. And a cat jumped out of a tree. I took off running. Then I got embarrassed and I went back to the graveyard again. And then I heard something groaning. And I started to take off and run. And I realized there was a grave that had been dug. And a drunk man had fallen in the grave. So what I did was jump down in there and help him get up and get out. That's what I did with my fear. So you always look at how can you respond in such a way that will be helpful rather than hurtful. And that's how you overcome the fear. So when you are faced with a situation, that rather than be fearful, start questioning, what is it I can do to reverse the situation? Rather than be fearful, be kind and helpful. Look for ways to do that. So that's what I did with the fear. So when it was many situations I can tell you about where, I had to deal with situations like, I wrote a book on Selma, Alabama, and that will tell you about the situation I had with the night they were going to kill Medvedev. It's called In Peace and Freedom, My Journey in Selma. Okay? That's it right there. That's with Martin Luther King. So when you deal with fear, fight fear with understanding and courage. In other words, when you think of fear, all right, don't let it overcome you, but overcome it.
Thank you very much. And we do have a question from the audience as well.
Hi, Dr. Lafayette. My name is Cassandra West. I am a recent graduate of Howard University. I
I'll give you, since I have a lot of time in this show, I'll give you one example. And that was when I was in Colombia, Latin America, and Ethiopia, this was the state there. And the governor was really excited about Martin Luther King, had been reading Martin Luther King books and stuff like that, etc., because he wanted to deal with the conflict they were having between the Colombian people and the FARC, okay? And the FARC had a strong reputation, still do, of, taking the lives of people and kidnapping them and that kind of thing. So the governor planned to have a march all the way from Casero, up to a place where the FARC had taken control of people and their tobacco. In other words, people would go and work and get their tobacco, and then that's how they, no, I'm sorry, not tobacco this time. It was actually getting there. The coffee beans, yeah. They had lots of coffee beans, casero. So what happened is the FARC would take the coffee beans, half of them. So the people didn't make much profit because they take truckloads of their coffee beans. So we went out there and we did some training with the people. So they learned how to surround, because the FARC went and they, what did they do? They hit the priest in the head. Yeah. And then they snatched the rosary, because the priest was doing the rosary, and they snatched the rosary from the priest and threw it in the river. So I was working with the governor of Casero, and so we went up there, and we flew a helicopter, and we went up there and had a press conference. And he asked me to go with him. Well, my confession is I didn't know what to say. I mean, because this was Colombia. And so the governor said everything he had to say in Spanish. And so they asked me to say something. You know what I said? Tell the FARC to get 10,000 rivers. Because if you like throwing rosaries in the river, I'm going to bring back 10,000 rosaries. And I was on the spur of the moment. So I had to figure out where I'm going to get 10,000 rosaries. But I went back to Rhode Island, and I got one of my doctoral students, who was Catholic, and she was tremendous. She got boxes and boxes, and got donations of rosaries. And you're looking at somebody who took back 10,000 rosaries. And then we had a march, because this Governor Gaviria, he wanted to have a march like Martin Luther King, So we started marching up the mountains. And you know what I found out? These older people had more energy in walking up these mountains than the young people. Because they did it every day. They had practice. And I was just amazed at the energy these older people had. Well, we got halfway up there and the FARC said, if you come into this village, after you leave, we're going to attack the village. So while you're going up to help the people, the very thing that you're doing to help them is going to cause them later to be attacked. So what do? How do you help people? You're going up there, So we decided, they asked me what to do. So I said, send a message to the fire that we are coming up there, but we won't go into the village. We just will come to the borders of the village. So we were negotiating, right? So we didn't say we were going in. They said we could go in the village. So I took a piece of their, statement and just sanitized it, okay? So we only went up to the edge village. You know what they did when we got there? They turned around and kidnapped us. The governor, the other elected officials, they even kidnapped priests. Because they told us they were going to negotiate with them, and they kept walking us and walking us and walking us. And one of the people who had the rifle on me was a young girl, about 15 years old. She was so excited. I was from the United States and could speak English. She just kept talking and talking and talking, and she was just glad to have a gun on me. Yeah, the rifle was supposed to just gone off and over with. But anyway, I didn't stop talking. Yeah, but you got a rifle on you. Somebody want to talk. So we went on up there, and she was interested in the English. She wanted to speak English and everything. Later on, I found out that that's the way the fire recruited people. They go to these homes in the rural areas and take all the children 15 and up and older. That's what they call recruitment. Put them in the fire. Teach them how to shoot guns and stuff and all that kind of business. Well, now, I have to tell you that I do some serious research. Before you go into situations, do serious research. One of the things that I learned from Quantico, these are people who have gone to Quantico, people who have been teaching Quantico. That's a special, part of our U.S. government that train people, okay? And very select leaders go there. I've never been there, but I've been trained by people who have. One of the things I learned is that when you're kidnapped, if you're not killed in the first 2 hours, the purpose for kidnapping you is not to kill you. It is to trade you or to, get money for, you to come back. So I went and I up the hill, and we realized we were kidnapped, but they kept telling us just up the hill that is where we're gonna meet. No, we're not gonna meet. So I stopped, and I sat on a rock, huge rock, and I said, it's past my lunchtime, so I gotta get something to eat. I'm not going any further. So I was sitting in other words, and I had experience sitting in, right? To eat. When I want to sit in, I sit in and eat. So, they say, get up. I just put that gun right in my chest. I said, no, you get it conmigo, okay? In other words, I can speak a little Spanish, grandfather was born in Cuba. So I said, no. Comero. In other words, I want to eat in my stomach. I don't want the gun, the rifle, food. Comero. They looked at each other and they said, in Spanish, they said, gringo, they call all the Americans gringos, black or white. Gringo es mucho loco. So they say, this gringo is crazy. we got this gun in his chest, in his stomach, and he's telling us what to do. I said, no, I have to eat now. No more. And so they didn't know what to do because the leader of the group was not there. El Paiso was the leader. So they had to go get him and have him to come because they didn't know what to do. Because they couldn't get me to cooperate. And I had been talking English and back and developed a relationship with the troops. And so the troops were not, alienated from me at all. They enjoyed my visit with them. So, El Paiso, who was the leader of the group of 400 troops, he came and he decided what he would do is get rid of me because I was having too much influence over the troops. And they didn't want to have to shoot or kill me. But that's not what they wanted to do for this group. Like I say, they didn't kill you in 2 hours. Their purpose was not to kill you. Okay? I knew that. So I wasn't. So it's on my courage. I had never been in a situation like that before, but I have believed what the teachings are as much as I can. And it said that they don't, the purpose was not to kill you if they had me 4 hours, 2 hours. So I sat there with my arms full. Food, no matter. But you know what I found out later? I was waiting for the leader to come. There was a fellow who had a sleeve that was longer than his hand. A sleeve longer than his hand. You know why the sleeve was long? Because he, one of the troops, had gone in the jungle, found him a chicken, and killed the chicken, and then plucked the chicken's feathers off, and then cleaned the chicken out, and then put the chicken on a skew, okay, and cooked the chicken, and then ate the chicken without El Paiso's permission. You don't do that without the leader's permission. So, to make a point to everybody else, but you don't need to make a point to him, they cut his hand off. Yeah. So, that's why they thought that I was crazy, because I wasn't paying any attention to them. And they had the ability to cut your hand off or whatever, your head off, when you don't cooperate. Anyway, they put me on a horse and got me out of there. Yeah. They said, we don't want this gringo here, because, it's having too much influence on the people. Because when I continued to demand food, you know what they did? They went down to the trucks that had come up on the marsh for 5 days, and they brought back food. Yeah. Okay, and a great big old leaf like that, tamale pie, wrapped up in there. Oh man, it was good too. I stayed there. I didn't necessarily want to leave because the food was good, So they brought the food up there. So anyway, they put me on a horse, bareback horse, no saddle. I'm from Florida, but I haven't been riding no horses, So they put me on the back of that horse, and that horse went up on the hind legs. Almost threw me off that horse. They said, no. And they were trying to tell me they spoke Spanish, I learned a little bit. But you don't put your heel of your foot in your shoes in the stomach of the horse when you're riding bareback. You can do your knees. And that's how you hold yourself on the horse. I had to learn that real fast. That horse could not speak English. And I didn't say anything to that horse. But I didn't know what to say to that horse, and that horse only understood Spanish. So I might say the wrong thing, and that horse, you know. So, but anyway, they got somebody to lead the horse and down the mountains. That was the fighting part. But anyway, those are the kind of experiences I've had. But the main point I want to make is that you always be prepared to adjust to situations. Show no fear. Use every other resource available to you, including the knowledge that you get from Quanticom.
All right, so thank you very much. I'm afraid that we are out of time, but we deeply appreciate your time, your flexibility, your generosity in answering our questions and sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us. So thank you very much.
Okay, she's from Tuskegee, Alabama, and her father was Booker T. Washington's office boy. This is Kate Lafayette. Okay?
Oh, have a meeting.
Pleasure to meet you as well.
Thank you. Okay.
Very nice.
Thank you so much for all